What I'm going to do now is put the power supply in the case. This case has a few thumb screws on it, which is going to remove the cage that surrounds the power supply. To me, that is nice, which is because I'm going to be able to just drop the power supply in there. I'll put this cage back in when I think it is required to go in. So I'm going to set this aside. For right now, here's the power supply. Fan goes up. This is nice because this is a bottom mounted case. So I can set her down in here. Slide her up to the back. Put a couple of screws in, and that is done. After this, we're going to talk about putting the processor in the motherboard and the cooling fan on the motherboard and placement of the motherboard in the case. Okay, what we're doing now is checking placement of the motherboard and if the cooling fan I bought is going to fit. Right now the motherboard is not bolted in. I just set her in there. I still have to replace the back panel on the case. I'm going to do that next. Tell them, well, we don't need your help. Okay, I've got the cooling fan in hand. I'm going to stick it right about where the processor is going to be, just to check clearance. That is going to fit just fine. It was a small concern of mine because a lot of the reviews of the case have said large CPU coolers will not fit in this case. I made a wise choice by going with a smaller one, but I think the bigger one might have fit also. So, that's a happy thought. Up next is getting the CPU on the motherboard. Parts I'm going to skip out on are placing the screws in the case for the motherboard and replacing that back panel. It just pops out and you pop the new one in. So, next time you see me, we'll be putting the CPU on the motherboard. Okay, now we're going to talk about CPU installation on the motherboard. Couple of things. The Zalman cooler has this adapter clip for the socket on the motherboard. It's a two-part install. I have to undo these screws. There are 4 of them. Set that part aside. That part's what holds this CPU cooler to the CPU. This part here holds the cooling fan to the motherboard. I'm not going to film that part because there's just putting 4 screws and 4 holes. I don't think you guys need to see that part. So, I'll be back in a second. Okay, I'm back. I've got the clip installed. The only tool you really need when working on a computer, well, assembling a computer, is a screwdriver. Occasionally you might need a pair of needle nose pliers just to get some things in and out of sockets. For the most part, good Phillips head screwdriver is your major tool. Now, we're going to put the CPU in the motherboard next. This has always been fairly straightforward, mainly because they just go in a socket. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bit more clear. Here's the socket. There's a little lever right here. I flip the lever open. While the lever's up, I can pull this hinged drawer open. Have to finagle it a little bit. And then the socket cover comes right out. Now the socket is open. The CPU is only going to go into the socket in one and only one way. That makes life a little easier. In fact, most computer parts, their sockets are arranged that way, so things just fit in one specific way. It makes them sort of idiot-proof. Back in the day when they first started all this, the sockets were not that way, and you could put things in backwards. They've learned a lot over the years. So, let me zoom back out. Oops, wrong direction. And I will get the CPU and we will put her in. CPU comes in an anti-static case, sealed up pretty tight. Let me get her opened. She is opened and out of her case. Now, there are notches on the side of the socket. they correspond to the notches on the CPU. I don't know if you can see these notches. There's one at the bottom, there's 3 along this side, a couple across the top, a couple down the side. They are not symmetric. This is going to allow me to get it in the socket properly. You just align the notches to the socket. So here we go. Taking a look here. I think I got her set down, got her aligned correctly. That doesn't feel right. So let's see if we turn it this way. If that feels right. Yep, that was the right way to put her. You know it's right because it just sits down in there and it doesn't want to move once you get it set down in there. When I had it the wrong way, it was too free to slide around. So now I close the cover lid. Well, can't close the cover lid yet. I gotta lift the lever first. Lift the lever, close the cover lid, push the lever back down in there, and yes, it does require a little bit of force. That's to give the CPU good contact. The CPU is now installed. It is that easy. Next up comes the cooler. Now, I'm using an aftermarket cooler. The stock Intel cooler was quite large. It's right here. And size comparison, they're almost the same size. The aftermarket cooler is a little bit bigger. The stock cooler has these gray strips on here. Let's zoom in so we can see that a little bit better. Those gray strips are thermal grease. Okay? Aftermarket coolers do not have this thermal grease on them. Some do, some don't. The brand I bought did not. But it's nothing you have to go out and buy extra. They usually come with little tubes of thermal grease. I'm not using the thermal grease that came with the cooler. I'm going to use an aftermarket product. It's made by the same people that make this cooler. It's just that most people feel the aftermarket stuff's a little bit better. Now, you don't want to just slather this stuff all over the CPU. You want a thin layer of the stuff. You don't want it on there incredibly thick. It's just to help conduct the heat away from the CPU to the cooler. Now, this bottle right here has like a little paintbrush like you would have on liquid paper. So I'm just really just painting the CPU with the thermal grease. Makes it kind of easy. Any of you model builders out there who are watching this, you understand painting with a paintbrush, because that's all I'm doing. And I'm not loading her up and making her a thick, thick mass. That's done. Next thing I gotta do is make sure I get this aligned correctly on the base. I can't just put it on there any old way I want, but it will fit on there any old way I want. See, it fits either way. The CPU cooler, however, is only going to fit on there one way. So, when I get this guy out, look at that nice, pretty, shiny bottom. I've heard some people sanding that to make sure it's smooth. I look at that, that's a pretty mirror-like surface right now. I'm not going to sand that, I'm not going to polish that, I'm just going to use it as it is. Getting the clip out of the way. Okay, of course it won't cooperate, I'm videotaping. Got the clip out of the way. What I want to do is align this so the long direction on this is meeting the long direction on the case. Another thing that would be good to check is the direction air is going to move through this fan. I'm not sure which way air is going to move through this fan just yet, so I'm not putting this on here correctly. I want air moving through this fan the same direction the case fans are pulling the air. That way I'm not fighting the case fan to cool my CPU. I'm working with the case fan to cool my CPU. So give me a minute, I'm going to consult the directions. I'm going to consult the directions on the case and make sure that I have the air moving the direction I want.